The champagne glass shattered against the galley wall at precisely the moment Sarah Chen realized she'd been holding her breath for 47 seconds. She didn't flinch. After 11 years working first class on transcontinental flights, her hands moved automatically to gather the crystal shards scattered across the carpet, while her face maintained the same professional neutrality she'd perfected somewhere over Kansas on a red-eye in 2018. The morning had started normally enough. Alarm at 4:15 a.m., quick shower while the Oakland street outside her window was still dark and quiet. Protein bar eaten standing at the kitchen counter because sitting down would have made her late. She'd kissed Mia's forehead while her daughter slept, left a note for James reminding him about his practice audition. Normal, routine, the kind of day that should have ended with her collapsing into bed, feet aching, thinking about nothing more dramatic than whether she had enough milk for tomorrow's coffee. Instead, she was kneeling on first-class carpet, picking up glass shards, while a man who'd made his fortune buying failing companies and stripping them for parts watched her with amusement. The man who'd thrown it, Marcus Whitmore, according to the passenger manifest she'd memorized during pre-flight, leaned back in seat 2A with the kind of smile that suggested he'd never once experienced a genuine consequence. "You missed a spot," he said, pointing at a sliver of glass near his Italian leather shoe. He was younger than she'd expected from the Forbes profile she'd glimpsed on someone's phone in the terminal. Maybe 45, with the particular smoothness that expensive skincare and minimal stress provide. His suit probably cost more than she made in a month. Sarah picked up the shard without comment. Around them, the first-class cabin had gone silent in that uniquely American way, passengers pretending to be absorbed in their laptops and magazines, while their attention fixed completely on the confrontation unfolding 3 feet away. The hum of the engines at cruising altitude provided a white noise backdrop that somehow made the silence more pronounced. In seat 3A, a young woman in her 20s, tech startup founder based on the laptop stickers and the Tesla shareholder newsletter peeking from her bag, had stopped typing mid-sentence. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard, frozen. Sarah had served her a mimosa 20 minutes earlier, had noticed the Yale-class ring, had made a mental note that she'd said thank you 3 times for a single drink. Good upbringing, Sarah had thought. Parents who taught manners. Across the aisle in 2C, an elderly man traveling with his wife had his Wall Street Journal lowered just enough that Sarah could see his eyes tracking the scene. Harold and June Patterson, the manifest had said. Married 53 years, June had told Sarah during boarding, on their way to their grandson's bar mitzvah in San Jose. Harold's jaw was tight with disapproval, but he said nothing. His wife's hand had found his arm, a gentle pressure that said, "Don't get involved. We're too old for other people's battles." Only Martha Davidson in 1B looked directly at Sarah, her eyes wide with what might have been solidarity or fear or both. "I asked for Cristal," Whitmore said, his voice carrying the particular cadence of someone accustomed to being heard. "This is Veuve Clicquot. Are you unable to read? Or did you just assume I wouldn't notice the difference?" The older woman in 1B, Martha Davidson, traveling to her daughter's wedding in San Francisco, shifted uncomfortably. Sarah had helped her with her carry-on earlier. Noticed the mother of the bride dress carefully hung in the closet. Noticed, too, the way Martha's hands shook slightly when she'd asked for ginger ale instead of the complimentary champagne, saving money where she could. "I apologize for the confusion, Mr. Whitmore," Sarah said, her voice level. "We don't stock crystal on this aircraft. I can offer you Dom Perignon or—" "Then why," he interrupted, "am I sitting in first class on a flight that costs $6,000 if you can't provide basic amenities?" He looked around at the other passengers, seeking an audience. "Is this what premium service has become? Maybe I should move to economy. At least there, the expectations match the service level." The joke landed exactly as he'd intended. A couple of passengers smiled uncomfortably. The man in 3C Tech CEO, Sarah had noted his Patagonia vest and AirPods Max, chuckled into his MacBook. Martha looked down at her hands. Sarah placed the broken glass in her tray and met Whitmore's eyes. Something in her expression made him straighten slightly in his seat, though she hadn't changed her pleasant, professional demeanor at all. "Mr. Whitmore," she said quietly, "I'd be happy to arrange an economy seat for you when we land. In fact, I'd be honored to help you make that change." The words were perfectly polite. The tone was perfectly professional. But something in the way she said them made the temperature in the cabin drop 5 degrees. Whitmore's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "You mentioned moving to economy," Sarah continued. "I want you to know that it's a valid choice, and there's absolutely no shame in it. I flew economy for 23 years before I started working for this airline. My mother still does whenever she visits from Seattle. She's a hospice nurse. She sits in 34B or 35C, and she's never once complained about the service, even on the flights where we run out of her first meal choice or the Wi-Fi is slow." She paused, and in that pause, every passenger in first class realized they'd stopped even pretending not to listen. "What I'm saying, Mr. Whitmore, is that you're absolutely right. Economy is full of people whose expectations match their circumstances. People who work third shift and save for months to visit their grandchildren. People who wake up at 4 a.m. to make their flights because they can't afford the later, more convenient departure times. People who've never thrown anything at another human being because they understand that affordability isn't the same as availability, and that the person serving them is exactly that, a person." Whitmore's face had progressed from pale to red. "How dare you—" "I'm not finished," Sarah said, and something in her voice made him close his mouth. "You asked if I could read. Yes, Mr. Whitmore, I can. I graduated summa cum laude from UC Berkeley with a degree in aerospace engineering. I can read technical manuals, stress analysis reports, and fluid dynamics equations. I can also read a passenger manifest, which is how I know you're the Marcus Whitmore who made headlines 3 months ago for threatening to pull your company's funding from a children's hospital because they named their new wing after a donor your father had a business dispute with in 1987. The silence in the cabin had weight now. Martha Davidson's eyes were wide. The tech CEO had stopped typing. "I chose this job," Sarah continued, her voice still calm, still perfectly modulated. "Not because I couldn't do anything else, but because after my husband died and left me with 2 kids to raise alone, I needed schedule flexibility and benefits that would cover my daughter's leukemia treatments. That was 9 years ago. My daughter's in remission now. She starts at Stanford in the fall, studying political science. My son just got accepted to Juilliard for violin, and I'm still here, serving champagne, whatever brand we happen to stock, because I'm good at this work, and because there's dignity in all honest labor, even the kind that requires you to smile at people who think throwing glasses makes them powerful." She picked up her tray with the broken crystal. "So yes, Mr. Whitmore, I can help you move to economy. I can also serve you the Dom Perignon we have available, or I can bring you water, coffee, or nothing at all. The choice is entirely yours. But what I won't do is stand here and accept your implication that my work or my worth is measured by your satisfaction with our champagne selection." Sarah turned and walked back toward the galley, her steps measured and professional. Behind her, the first-class cabin remained frozen in that moment of collective shock that comes when someone's carefully constructed superiority is dismantled with surgical precision. Whitmore sat in his seat, his mouth slightly open, his face now approaching purple. No one was looking at him directly, but everyone was aware of him in a new way, not as the most important person in the cabin, but as the man who'd just been publicly, calmly, and completely undone by a flight attendant in a navy blue uniform. Martha Davidson reached up and pressed her call button. When Sarah returned, Martha's voice was soft but clear enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "Could I have that champagne now? Please, the Veuve Clicquot is just fine." 3 other passengers pressed their call buttons in the next 30 seconds. Sarah served them all with the same professional grace she'd maintained throughout, but as she moved through the cabin, she could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The other passengers looked at her differently now, not as an invisible service provider, but as a person they'd just watched stand her ground with quiet, devastating effectiveness. When she finally returned to the galley, her colleague Jason was staring at her with something between awe and concern. "Sarah, that was—" "I know," she said quietly, her hands finally starting to shake now that she was out of view. "I know." Jason had been flying for 3 years, still young enough to be idealistic about the job, still believing that hard work and kindness would be enough. He'd graduated from San Diego State with a hospitality degree and genuinely loved service work, loved making people's days better. Sarah had trained him, had taught him how to read passengers, how to diffuse tension, how to keep smiling even when someone treated you like furniture. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do on a plane," he said, his voice low. "Sarah, you destroyed him, in the best possible way." She leaned against the counter, feeling the adrenaline starting to drain from her system, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Through the galley curtain she could still see into first class. Whitmore hadn't moved from his seat. The tech CEO was typing furiously on his phone, probably tweeting about what he'd just witnessed, Sarah thought distantly. Martha Davidson was crying quietly, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I also probably just ended my career," Sarah said. "He threw a glass at you. His attorneys will say it slipped. It's his word against mine, and his word comes with a lot more money behind it." Jason's face fell as reality set in. "So what are you going to do?" Sarah thought about that email waiting on her phone, the meeting tomorrow morning with HR and her supervisor, and people who would have already made their decision before she walked into the room. She thought about the severance package they'd probably offer, the non-disclosure agreement they'd insist she sign, the way corporations always protected their highest-paying customers at the expense of their lowest-paid employees. "I'm going to do my job," she said finally. "For the next 4 hours, I'm going to serve these passengers with the same professionalism I've maintained for 11 years. And then I'm going to go home to my kids and figure out what comes next." She'd just done something that could cost her job. She'd violated the cardinal rule of service work. The customer is always right, even when they're throwing glassware and degrading you in front of a dozen witnesses. Her supervisor would hear about this. There would be forms, meetings, possibly termination, but as she looked out at the cabin through the galley doorway, at Martha Davidson sipping her champagne with tears in her eyes, at the tech CEO who'd closed his laptop and was staring thoughtfully at nothing, at Marcus Whitmore sitting in rigid silence in his $6,000 seat, Sarah found she couldn't regret it. Some things were worth losing a job over. Dignity was one of them. The flight had another 4 hours before landing. Sarah took a deep breath, smoothed her uniform, and prepared to face whatever came next. The email arrived 17 minutes after they landed at SFO. Sarah saw it while she was still in the terminal, pulling her roller bag past the clusters of passengers reuniting with family members, past the drivers holding name signs, past Marcus Whitmore being met by a man in a black suit who looked like he collected other people's problems for a living. Whitmore didn't look at her as she passed. He'd spent the remaining 4 hours of the flight staring at his laptop screen with the particular intensity of someone who was definitely not working. As Sarah walked, she noticed something strange. People were looking at her, not just glancing, but actually stopping, staring, some reaching for their phones. A teenager in a Cal Berkeley hoodie whispered to her friend, both of them turning to watch Sarah pass. A businessman paused mid-conversation, phone pressed to his ear, his eyes tracking her movement through the terminal. The video had already started spreading. In the time it took to fly from Newark to San Francisco, 5 hours and 47 minutes, her moment of defiance had transformed into something larger than herself. She was becoming a symbol, whether she wanted to be or not. At baggage claim, a woman approached her, mid-40s, wearing scrubs printed with cartoon characters. Pediatric nurse, Sarah guessed. The woman's eyes were red, like she'd been crying recently. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice tentative. "Are you the flight attendant from the video?" Sarah considered denying it. But what was the point? "Yes. I just want to say thank you." The woman's voice cracked slightly. "I work in healthcare, and I've had doctors and administrators talk to me the way that man talked to you. I've never had the courage to say anything back. Watching you, it meant something. It reminded me that my work matters, that I matter. So thank you." Before Sarah could respond, the woman had walked away, disappearing into the crowd of travelers. Sarah stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over her. This wasn't just about her anymore. Somehow, in refusing to accept degradation, she'd touched something raw in people, all the service workers and nurses and teachers and anyone who'd ever been made to feel less than because of the work they did. The subject line of the email read, "Immediate meeting required, employee incident report." Her supervisor, Dale Brennan, had copied 3 people from HR and the regional director. The meeting was scheduled for tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp, at the airline's administrative offices in Millbrae. The word "immediate" appeared twice in the 2-paragraph email. Sarah had been flying long enough to know what that meant. She sat on the BART train back to her apartment in Oakland, watching the industrial landscape of the East Bay slide past the windows, and tried to calculate how long her savings would last if she was terminated. 6 months, maybe 8 if she was careful. Long enough to find another job, though nothing with benefits like these. Nothing that would let her cover Mia's follow-up appointments, the ones that weren't strictly necessary anymore, but that Sarah would never, ever skip. Not after watching her daughter lose her hair in clumps at age 7, after learning the specific sound of a child vomiting from chemotherapy, after those 3 a.m. emergency room visits that had carved permanent grooves of fear into her soul. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mia. "Mom, you're not going to believe this. Someone posted a video of you on TikTok, and it has like 200K views already." Sarah's stomach dropped. She opened the app she'd downloaded solely to watch her kids' cooking experiments and badly choreographed dances. The video was there, tagged "Ja Flight Attendant Hero" and "Ja's First-Class Drama," filmed from what looked like Seat 4A. The angle caught everything. Whitmore's sneer, the shattered glass, Sarah's calm recitation of facts that had apparently resonated with 200,000 strangers. The comments were scrolling too fast to read individually, but certain phrases jumped out. "Destroyed him. This is what dignity looks like. Give this woman a raise, not a firing. I've been that flight attendant." Her phone rang. Emma, her younger sister, calling from Portland. "Sarah, what the hell? You're viral, like actually viral. There are news sites calling our house asking for comments." News sites? Sarah closed her eyes. This was worse than she'd thought. CNN, NBC, some website called Business Insider. Mom's freaking out, by the way. She wants to know if you're getting fired. Are you getting fired? "I have a meeting tomorrow," Sarah said. "It's not looking great." "For what? Defending yourself?" "Sarah, the guy threw a glass at you. That's assault. You could press charges." "On a plane? Against a billionaire?" Sarah laughed without humor. "Emma, I need this job. The video is making things worse, not better. Now it's a PR situation. Now the airline has to respond publicly." She could hear her sister moving around, probably pacing the way she did when she was agitated. Emma had inherited their father's nervous energy, the kind that needed physical outlet. There's a petition already. Support Sarah Chen. It has 50,000 signatures. A petition for what? For the airline not to fire you. People are saying they'll boycott if you lose your job. Sarah, people are on your side. Sarah leaned her head against the train window, feeling the vibration of the tracks through the glass. People are on my side until they're not. Until the next story, the next outrage, the next viral moment. This is my life, Emma. My rent, my kids' futures. I can't afford for this to be a trending topic that everyone forgets about in 3 days while I'm unemployed. When she got home, Mia and her brother James were waiting in their cramped 2-bedroom apartment with the kind of barely contained energy that told her they'd been refreshing social media feeds for hours. "Mom, you're famous," Mia said, pulling her into a hug. At 17, she was nearly Sarah's height now, all long limbs and her father's dark eyes. "Everyone at school is texting me. They're saying you're a hero." "I'm not a hero," Sarah said, setting down her bag. "I'm a flight attendant who might have just talked herself out of a job." James, 15 and serious in the way that gifted musicians often were, had his violin case sitting by his feet. Practice at the community music center must have just ended. "The guy deserved it, though," he said quietly. "The way he talked to you. Dad would have been proud." The mention of David landed like it always did, sharp and unexpected even after 9 years. He'd been the one who believed she could do anything, who'd encouraged her to apply to Berkeley in the first place, who'd sat with her during those late-night study sessions when aerospace engineering felt impossible. He died 3 weeks after Mia's diagnosis, his heart failing suddenly at 34 while he was coaching James's Little League team. Sometimes Sarah thought he'd just run out of capacity for stress, that watching his daughter fight for her life had quite literally broken his heart. "Dad would have wanted me to keep my job," Sarah said gently. "He would have wanted me to be smart, not brave." But as she said it, she wondered if that was true. David had been the one who'd taught her that some lines couldn't be uncrossed, that dignity mattered more than convenience. He'd been the one who'd refused to stay silent when his company tried to scapegoat an immigrant co-worker for their own accounting errors. He'd lost his job over it too, though he'd found another one within weeks. Different times, different economy. That night Sarah lay awake in the bedroom that still felt too empty, scrolling through the comments on the video. Most were supportive, angry on her behalf, sharing their own stories of mistreatment in service jobs. But some cut deeper. "Easy to be righteous when you're looking for your 15 minutes. Bet she practiced that speech. Sounds too perfect. Whatever happened to just doing your job?" The worst part was that last comment had 3 Dwaro likes. Around midnight, there was a soft knock on her door. Mia stood there in her pajamas, the Stanford sweatshirt she'd bought with her own money from her part-time job at the bookstore. She'd worn it constantly since it arrived, like wearing it would make the acceptance more real, more permanent. "Can't sleep either?" Mia asked, climbing onto the bed beside her mother. Sarah set down her phone. "Just thinking. About tomorrow. About a lot of things. About how we're going to pay bills if I lose this job. About whether I just made the biggest mistake of my life. About whether standing up for myself is worth watching you have to defer Stanford or take out loans that'll follow you for decades." Mia was quiet for a moment, her head resting on Sarah's shoulder, the way she used to when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. "Do you remember what you told me when I was in treatment? When I said I didn't want to do another round of chemo because I was so tired and sick and I just wanted it to be over?" Sarah remembered. It had been the worst day, worse than the diagnosis, worse than watching Mia's hair fall out, worse than any of the physical symptoms. It had been the day her 8-year-old daughter had looked at her and said, "Maybe we should just stop." The day Sarah had realized her child was so exhausted, she was willing to let the cancer win. "You told me," Mia continued, "that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing, that we don't get to choose easy, but we get to choose dignity, that giving up might feel like relief in the moment, but we'd regret it every day after." She lifted her head to look at her mother. "Isn't this the same thing?" "It's not the same, Mia. You are fighting for your life, and you're fighting for your dignity, for the right to exist in the world without being treated like you're less than because of your job. Mom, if you take their money and sign their papers and stay quiet, what are you teaching me and James? That we should always choose comfort over what's right. That money matters more than self-respect." Sarah pulled her daughter close, feeling tears prick her eyes. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from the best," Mia said quietly. They sat like that for a while, mother and daughter, until James appeared in the doorway, violin in hand. "I couldn't sleep either," he said. "Can I play something?" Sarah nodded, and James raised his violin, the instrument that had cost 3 months of her salary, but that he'd earned through 3 years of discipline and practice. He played a piece Sarah recognized, Meditation from Thais, slow and achingly beautiful. It was the piece he'd played at David's funeral, the piece that had made the entire chapel go silent with its grief and grace. When he finished, Sarah was crying openly. James lowered his violin and came to sit on the other side of the bed, sandwiching her between her 2 children. These miracles who somehow kept showing her what courage looked like. "Whatever you decide tomorrow," James said, "we're with you. We'll figure it out together." At 2 a.m., unable to sleep despite her children's support, Sarah opened her laptop and started drafting her resignation letter, not because she'd decided to quit, but because she needed to see the words, needed to practice for the possibility. "After 11 years of service, I regret to inform you." She got that far and stopped. Her phone lit up with a new email, this one from a law firm in downtown San Francisco. Pro bono representation, employment law. They'd seen the video. They wanted to help, free of charge. Another email, this one from a woman in Wisconsin. "My daughter is starting chemo next week. Your strength helps me find mine." Another, "I was a flight attendant for 30 years. Thank you for saying what we all felt." They kept coming, dozens of them. Strangers reaching across the digital void to tell her she'd mattered. She'd been seen, she'd been right. Sarah closed her laptop and sat in the darkness of her living room, listening to the familiar sounds of her neighborhood. The BART train rumbling past 4 blocks away, the couple upstairs arguing in Spanish, the distant wail of sirens heading toward Highland Hospital. This was Oakland, her home for 15 years, the city where she'd raised her children and buried her husband and learned that survival was its own kind of grace. Tomorrow, she'd go to that meeting. Tomorrow, she'd face whatever consequences came from refusing to be diminished by a man who'd never had to fight for anything in his life. But tonight, sitting in the dark with the evidence of strangers' kindness glowing on her phone screen, Sarah let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, doing the right thing didn't always have to cost everything. The conference room at the airline's administrative offices was designed to intimidate, all glass walls and polished concrete floors, with a view of the airport's runways, where planes took off every 90 seconds, regular as clockwork. Sarah sat in a chair that was intentionally uncomfortable, facing 4 people whose expressions ranged from carefully neutral to barely concealed hostility. Dale Brennan, her supervisor for 6 years, wouldn't meet her eyes. That told her everything. The woman from HR, Patricia Nguyen, had the passenger incident report open on her tablet. "Ms. Chen, do you understand why you're here?" "Yes," Sarah said. Her hands were folded in her lap, still and controlled, even though her heart was hammering hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. Can you walk us through what happened on Flight 2847 from Newark to San Francisco on October 15th? Sarah recounted it exactly as it had occurred, leaving nothing out: the shattered glass, Whitmore's comment about economy class, her response. She watched their faces as she spoke, trying to read which way this would go. The regional director, Tom Chen, no relation, though passengers sometimes assumed they were family, leaned forward. "Ms. Chen, you're aware that our policy is clear on passenger confrontation. Regardless of provocation, employees are expected to de-escalate, not engage." "I did de-escalate," Sarah said quietly. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't use profanity. I offered him choices, to change seats, to accept what we had available, or to be served nothing. All of those were professional options." "You also," Patricia said, pulling up something on her tablet, "disclosed personal medical information about your daughter and shared details about a passenger's charitable contributions, or lack thereof. That's a violation of privacy standards on multiple fronts." "I disclosed my own medical information," Sarah corrected. "My daughter's illness is my story to tell, not his to weaponize. And Mr. Whitmore's charitable issues are a matter of public record. They were reported in the New York Times 3 months ago. I cited publicly available information." "That's not the point," Tom said. His voice carried the particular weariness of someone who'd already made up his mind and was just going through the motions of procedure. "The point is that you created a situation where a high-value passenger felt attacked in front of other customers. Mr. Whitmore has flown first class with us 47 times in the past 2 years. He's a Platinum Elite member. His company books over $2 million in corporate travel through us annually." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. "And how many times have I worked first class in 11 years? How much value have I created for this airline in those 11 years? Or does that math not matter because I'm the employee, not the customer?" Patricia glanced at Tom. Dale was still studying the table like it held the secrets of the universe. "Sarah," Patricia said, and the use of her first name was somehow worse than the formality had been. "We understand that you were provoked. We understand that the video has generated significant public attention. But we have to consider the precedent this sets. If we allow employees to confront passengers, no matter how justified they might feel—" "He threw a glass at me," Sarah interrupted. "Actual glass. That shattered. That could have cut my face, my hands, that could have injured another passenger, and you're worried about me confronting him?" "Mr. Whitmore claims the glass slipped," Tom said. "There's no evidence it was thrown." Sarah stared at him. "There's a video with 200,000 views showing exactly what happened." "The video doesn't show the glass leaving his hand," Patricia said. "It shows the aftermath. Mr. Whitmore's attorney has been very clear about what they consider provable versus what they consider defamatory." "His attorney," Sarah repeated slowly. The full picture was coming into focus now. "This isn't about passenger safety or company policy. This is about Marcus Whitmore threatening legal action if you don't fire me." The silence that followed was answer enough. "We're prepared to offer you a severance package," Patricia said, sliding a folder across the table. 6 months' salary, continuation of health benefits for 1 year, and a positive reference for future employment. In exchange, you'll sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the incident and agree not to make any public statements about Mr. Whitmore or the airline." Sarah opened the folder. The numbers were generous, more generous than they should be for a termination with cause, which meant they knew they were on shaky legal ground. The severance was hush money, dressed up in corporate language. "What if I refuse?" she asked. Tom's expression hardened. "Then we'll proceed with termination for violation of conduct policies. And you'll receive neither severance nor benefits continuation. Your personnel file will reflect that you were fired for cause, which will make future employment in the airline industry difficult, if not impossible. So my choices are to take the money and disappear quietly, or lose everything and still disappear. We're offering you a generous package, Sarah. Dale finally spoke, his voice rough. More than most people get. Take it. Sarah looked at her supervisor, this man who'd written her excellent performance reviews for 6 years, who'd sent flowers when Mia went into remission, who'd approved her schedule changes so she could make James's concerts. He couldn't even meet her eyes. She thought about the messages on her phone, the strangers who'd shared their stories, the woman in Wisconsin whose daughter was starting chemotherapy, the former flight attendants who'd thanked her for speaking up, the petition with 50,000 signatures. She thought about Mia, starting at Stanford in 9 months, James, waiting to hear about financial aid from Juilliard, her mother in Seattle, living on a nurse's pension, who'd already offered to take out a second mortgage to help with expenses. She thought about David, dead at 34, who'd lost his job for standing up for what was right, and had never once regretted it. "I need to make a call," Sarah said. Patricia checked her watch. "We need an answer by end of business today. Then I'll have one for you by end of business today." Sarah walked out of that glass-walled conference room and took the elevator down to the parking garage. She sat in her 13-year-old Honda Civic, the one with the dent in the passenger door from where a shopping cart had hit it 3 years ago, and called the number for the law firm that had offered pro bono help. The attorney who answered was young, probably 30, with the eager intensity of someone who still believed the system could work if you pushed hard enough. Her name was Rachel Morrison, and she listened to Sarah's summary of the meeting without interrupting once. "Here's what they're betting on," Rachel said when Sarah finished. "They're betting that you need the money more than you need the principal. They're betting that single mothers don't have the luxury of fighting back. And they're probably right, statistically speaking. Most people in your position would take the severance." "But," Sarah said, because she could hear it in Rachel's voice, "but you have something they didn't count on. You have documentation of assault. That video shows the glass hitting the wall, shows Whitmore's body language and positioning. It's enough to make their claim that it slipped laughable. You have witnesses. At least 3 passengers have reached out to news outlets, saying they'd testify that Whitmore threw the glass deliberately. And you have public support that's turned this into a PR nightmare for both Whitmore and the airline. What are you saying?" "I'm saying we could fight this. File a complaint with the FAA about the assault, pursue wrongful termination charges, potentially go after Whitmore for workplace harassment and the airline for creating a hostile work environment. It would take time, maybe a year, maybe more. It would be stressful and public, and there are no guarantees. But you'd be setting a precedent. You'd be telling every service worker who's ever been degraded by someone with money that they don't have to just take it." Sarah closed her eyes. A year of legal battles, a year of uncertainty, a year of watching her savings evaporate, while she explained to her kids why Mom was in the news again, why they might need to change schools, why Stanford and Juilliard might have to wait. "Or I could take the severance," she said quietly. "Disappear, find another job, keep my head down." "You could," Rachel agreed, "and no one would blame you. That's a very reasonable choice." Through the phone, Sarah could hear the distant sound of traffic, the ambient noise of a city continuing on while her entire future hung in balance. "Give me until end of day," she said. "I need to talk to my kids." She drove home slowly, taking the long way through downtown Oakland, past the lake where she used to take Mia and James when they were small, past the library where they'd spent countless Saturday afternoons because it was free and air-conditioned and full of possibilities. This city had held her through the worst years of her life. She wondered if it would hold her through this, too. Mia and James were home from school, both of them pretending to do homework, but obviously waiting for news. They looked up when she walked in, their faces tense with anticipation. Sarah sat down on the worn couch they'd bought second-hand when they first moved to this apartment. "I need to tell you what's happening," she said. "And then I need you to help me decide what to do next." She laid it out for them, the severance offer, the alternative of fighting back, the costs and consequences of both paths. She didn't sugarcoat it. They were old enough to understand that sometimes the right choice and the safe choice weren't the same thing. When she finished, James spoke first. "What do you want to do, Mom?" It was such a simple question. No one at the airline had asked her that. They'd told her what she should do, what was practical, what made sense, but no one had asked what she wanted. Sarah looked at her children, these beautiful, brilliant people she'd somehow managed to raise, despite everything. Mia, who wanted to change the world through policy and politics. James, who could make a violin sing in ways that broke your heart, both of them watching her with David's eyes, waiting to see what she'd choose. "I want to fight," she said. "I want to stand up and say that what happened wasn't okay. I want them to know that they can't just buy silence. But I'm scared. I'm scared of what it might cost us." Mia moved to sit beside her, took her hand. "You taught me to be brave when I was sick. You told me that sometimes you have to face scary things because the alternative is worse. Isn't this the same?" "It's not the same," Sarah said. "You were facing cancer. This is just pride, principle. It's not life or death." "Isn't it, though?" James said quietly. "Maybe not physically, but you've been showing us our whole lives that how you live matters, that dignity matters. If you take their money and disappear, what does that teach us? That we should always choose comfort over what's right." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm supposed to be teaching you to be practical, to be smart." "You're teaching us to be strong," Mia said. "Mom, we'll figure out the money. I can defer Stanford for a year, get a job." "Absolutely not. Then I can take out loans like everyone else. James can too. We'll make it work. But you can't let them do this to you. You can't let that man think he can treat people like that and face no consequences." Sarah looked between her children, these people who'd somehow turned out better than she'd dared hope. "If I do this," she said, "everything changes. Our lives will be public. There will be reporters, lawyers, stress. It could take a year or more. We might lose." "We might win, though," James said. "And even if we don't, at least we'll know we tried." Sarah pulled them both into a hug, holding tight to these two pieces of her heart that somehow existed outside her body. They stayed like that for a long moment, three people who'd survived loss and illness and fear, who'd learned that sometimes courage was the only option left. When Sarah called Rachel Morrison back at 4:30 that afternoon, her voice was steady. "I'm not taking the severance," she said. "I want to fight." She could hear the smile in Rachel's voice. "Then let's get to work." The lawsuit was filed on a Tuesday morning in November. By Wednesday afternoon, it was national news. Flight attendant sues Billionaire, major airline over in-flight assault and wrongful termination, ran the headline on CNN. NPR did a 7-minute segment exploring labor rights in the service industry. The hashtag #ChuckStandWithSarah trended for 3 days straight. Marcus Whitmore's attorneys issued a statement calling the lawsuit a publicity stunt by a disgruntled employee seeking a payday. They threatened countersuits for defamation. The airline released carefully worded corporate language about how they took all employee concerns seriously while maintaining their commitment to all valued customers. The petition to reinstate Sarah hit 200,000 signatures. Sarah stopped reading the news after the first week. It was too much. The supporters who'd elevated her to hero status she didn't deserve, the detractors who called her an opportunist, the think pieces analyzing everything from her interview outfit to her decision to speak publicly about Mia's illness. The whole thing had taken on a life of its own, and somewhere in all the noise, the actual point, that she just wanted to do her job without being demeaned, had gotten lost. Rachel had warned her it would be like this. When you become a symbol, she'd said, you lose the ability to just be a person. Everyone projects their own stuff onto you. It's exhausting, and it's unfair, but it's the price of fighting publicly. The first deposition took place in December, in a law office overlooking the San Francisco Bay. Sarah sat across from Marcus Whitmore and his 3 attorneys, all men, all expensive suits, all wearing expressions that suggested they did this sort of thing before breakfast. Whitmore himself looked different than he had on the plane. Smaller somehow, more careful. The conference room was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the Bay Bridge, modern art that probably cost more than Sarah's car, leather chairs that were comfortable for everyone except the person being deposed. Rachel had warned her about this. They'll try to make you feel small. Don't let them. The court reporter sat ready, fingers poised over her machine. The camera in the corner blinked red. Everything would be recorded, transcribed, analyzed for weaknesses. Sarah had dressed carefully that morning. Her best interview suit from Macy's, simple jewelry, minimal makeup. Rachel had told her to look professional but not wealthy, sympathetic but not pathetic. It was exhausting, this calculation of appearances. For 6 hours, they tried to dismantle her story. They asked about her finances, implying she was motivated by money. Her employment history, looking for evidence of past complaints. Her marriage, suggesting that her emotional state as a widow made her unreliable. They asked about the video, about whether she'd known she was being filmed, about whether she'd planned her speech in advance. Ms. Jen, isn't it true that you've been struggling financially since your husband's death? This from Gregory Chen, Whitmore's lead attorney. No relation, but clearly using the shared surname to create some kind of psychological connection. I work full-time, Sarah said carefully. I provide for my family. But you've had to rely on medical debt payment plans, haven't you? For your daughter's treatment. Yes, like millions of Americans who face medical crises. And those debts must create significant stress. Stress that might make you more reactive to challenging situations. Rachel cut in. Is there a question, counselor, or are you just fishing? Gregory smiled without warmth. Ms. Chen, when Mr. Whitmore expressed dissatisfaction with the champagne selection, did you see an opportunity to create a confrontation that might benefit you financially? Sarah felt her face flush, but kept her voice level. No. I saw a man throwing glass at me and speaking to me like I was beneath him. I responded truthfully. Truthfully, Gregory repeated. You mentioned his charitable controversies. How did you know about those? I read the New York Times. The article was public record. Do you often research passengers before flights? I review manifest names, yes. It's part of my job to be prepared for VIP passengers. So you knew who Mr. Whitmore was before he boarded? I knew his name was on the manifest. I didn't know anything about him personally until I Googled him during my break before boarding, which is standard procedure for high-profile passengers. Gregory leaned forward. And when you Googled him, when you saw his controversies, did you form an opinion about him? I formed an understanding of who he was, a negative understanding, an accurate one. The questioning continued, circling back to the same points, trying to trap her in contradictions. They asked about David's death, implying she was still too grief-stricken to think clearly. They asked about Mia's illness, suggesting she'd mentioned it for sympathy points. They asked about her engineering degree, implying she was bitter about not using it. No, Sarah said over and over. No, I didn't know. No, I didn't plan it. No, I just wanted him to stop talking to me like I was nothing. They took a break at hour 4. Sarah sat in Rachel's office, drinking bad coffee from a machine down the hall, her hands shaking with exhaustion and suppressed anger. Through the window she could see the bay, the water grey under winter clouds, ferries crossing back and forth between San Francisco and Oakland. Somewhere out there was her apartment, her children, her real life. Here, in this glass tower, she was just a pawn in a game she'd never wanted to play. "They're fishing," Rachel said, sitting beside her. "They've got nothing concrete, so they're trying to find something, anything, to make you look bad. You're doing great." "I don't feel great," Sarah admitted. "I feel like I'm being punished for not staying silent." "You are being punished for that," Rachel said bluntly. "That's how the system works. It punishes people who speak up, and it rewards people who know how to work the system. But here's what they didn't count on. You've got 3 passengers willing to testify that Whitmore threw that glass deliberately. You've got employment records showing 11 years of excellent performance reviews. And you've got video evidence that you maintained professional composure even when you were well within your rights to lose it completely. And if the jury doesn't care about any of that, then we appeal, and we keep fighting until someone listens. Sarah, this isn't just about you anymore. There are 20,000 service workers in this city alone who are watching this case. If Whitmore wins, it sends a message that money can buy the right to treat people however you want. If you win, or even if you just fight hard enough, it sends a different message." "What message?" "That dignity isn't negotiable. That silence has a cost too high to pay." When they reconvened, Whitmore's lead attorney, a man named Gregory Chen, who'd made a career of defending corporations against discrimination suits, changed tactics. "Ms. Chen, you mentioned your daughter's illness in your statement on the plane. How is she doing now?" Rachel started to object, but Sarah touched her arm. "She's in remission. She's doing well. Thank you for asking." That must have been terrifying, having a child with cancer. "It was the worst experience of my life." "Would you say it changed you? Made you more defensive? More likely to perceive attacks where none existed?" Sarah took a slow breath. She understood what he was doing, trying to paint her as emotionally unstable, traumatized, unreliable. "It made me stronger," she said quietly. "It taught me that life is fragile and that wasting it on tolerating cruelty is a luxury none of us can afford. It taught me that the people who matter most are the ones who show up when things are hard. And it taught me that sometimes the right thing to do is the hardest thing to do." Gregory Chen studied her for a long moment, then he closed his notebook. "No further questions. Adieu." The airline settled 3 weeks later. It wasn't an admission of wrongdoing. Corporations never admitted wrongdoing. But it was a confidential settlement that included full back pay, benefits continuation, and a clause that Sarah could apply for reinstatement after 6 months with no negative marks on her record. It was, Rachel explained, as close to a win as they were likely to get without going to trial. "What about Whitmore?" Sarah asked. "Still pending. His attorneys are talking settlement too, but they're playing hardball. They want a non-disclosure agreement." "Absolutely not," Sarah said immediately, "even if it means more money. Especially if it means more money. The whole point of this was that silence has a cost, and I'm done paying it." In February, Sarah received an offer from a different airline, not to work as a flight attendant, but to develop their employee safety and dignity training program. The pay was better. The hours were better. She'd never have to serve another drink at 30,000 feet again. She turned it down. "Why?" Mia asked, genuinely confused. "Mom, it's perfect. It's what you've been fighting for." "I didn't fight to leave," Sarah explained. "I fought for the right to stay and be treated with respect. Taking another job feels like letting them win, like admitting that the only way to have dignity in this industry is to not be in this industry." In March, in The airline's new CEO, brought in after the previous one's early retirement under mysterious circumstances, announced a comprehensive review of customer service policies and employee protection measures. Sarah was invited to consult on the committee. She said yes to that. By April, the settlement with Whitmore finally came through. No non-disclosure agreement. That had been Sarah's line in the sand, and surprisingly his attorneys had backed down. The amount was enough to pay off the last of Mia's medical bills and put aside for both kids' colleges. Not life-changing money, but life-improving money. Freedom money. Sarah took Mia and James out to dinner at a nice restaurant in San Francisco to celebrate, the kind of place where they'd never gone before because it seemed like an unnecessary expense. They ordered appetizers and dessert. They laughed too loud and didn't care who heard them. The return to work came 3 weeks after the settlement, on a Tuesday morning that felt both familiar and completely foreign. Sarah stood in the crew ready room at SFO, pulling on her uniform jacket for the first time in 6 months. The fabric felt stiff, like it had forgotten the shape of her shoulders. Around her, other flight attendants were going through their pre-flight routines, checking makeup, reviewing manifests, grabbing coffee from the communal pot that always tasted slightly burnt. The conversation stopped when she entered, not all at once. That would have been too obvious, but in a rolling wave of awareness as people noticed her presence. Some looked away quickly, suddenly fascinated by their phones. Others stared openly. A few smiled, genuine and warm, the kind of smiles that said, "We're glad you're back. We're proud of what you did." Lisa Nguyen, who'd been flying for 20 years and had trained Sarah when she first started, crossed the room and pulled her into a hug. "About damn time," she said. "This place has been too quiet without you." "I'm sure it managed just fine," Sarah said, but she was grateful for the warmth, for the reminder that she had allies here. Did it, though? This from Michael Torres, another veteran flight attendant who Sarah had always respected for his unflappable professionalism. "Because I've been documenting every incident of passenger mistreatment since your video went viral. You know how many there have been in 6 months? 37, just on our routes. 37 times that passengers have thought they could treat us however they wanted because we're just service workers. Your fight made some of us braver about reporting, but it also made some passengers worse, like they were testing to see if they could get away with it too." Sarah felt the weight of that settle on her shoulders. Her actions had rippled outward in ways she hadn't anticipated, creating both progress and backlash. Dale Brennan, her supervisor, approached cautiously. He'd aged in 6 months, more grey in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes. "Chen," he said, using her last name the way he always did when he was being formal. "Welcome back. You're on the 10:15 to Chicago, first-class service." Of course it was first class. They were testing her, seeing if she'd flinch, if she'd request a different assignment. Sarah met his eyes steadily. "Understood." "Sarah," he said, his voice dropping lower, meant just for her. "I'm sorry. For what happened in that meeting. I should have stood up for you." "Yes," Sarah said simply. "You should have." She didn't make it easy for him, didn't offer forgiveness he hadn't earned. But she understood, too, the particular cowardice that came from having a mortgage and kids in college and only a few years left until retirement. Dale had made a choice, and he'd have to live with it. They both would. "Mom," James said, cutting into his steak with the careful precision he brought to everything. "What are you going to do now?" Sarah considered the question. She'd been reinstated at the airline the previous month, back on her regular routes, back in the sky. Some passengers recognized her, most didn't. Either way, she did her job the same, with competence and grace and the quiet dignity that had always been hers, even when people tried to take it away. "I'm going to keep flying," she said. I'm going to keep showing up and doing work I'm good at. And if someone throws another glass, I'm going to respond exactly the same way I did before, by reminding them that their money doesn't make them better than me, and my work doesn't make me less than them. What if you get fired again? Mia asked. Sarah smiled. Then I'll fight again. And I'll keep fighting until the cost of silencing people like me becomes higher than the cost of treating us with basic human respect. On her first flight back, Sarah found herself working first class again. She moved through the cabin with her cart, offering drinks and snacks, making conversation, handling the small complaints and requests with the same professionalism she'd maintained for 11 years. The 10:15 to Chicago was a full flight, every seat in first class occupied. Sarah recognized the types immediately. The business travelers with their laptops and conference calls, the vacationers who'd splurged on upgrades, the elites who flew first class so often they didn't even notice the service anymore. Most didn't recognize her. A few did, their eyes widening slightly before they looked away, uncomfortable with the recognition, with the reminder that their flight attendant was a real person with a story that had become national news. In seat 2A, Marcus Whitmore's old seat, sat a woman in her 60s wearing a Doctors Without Borders t-shirt and reading a book about climate change. When Sarah approached, the woman looked up and smiled warmly, the kind of smile that reached her eyes. "Could I get the Veuve Clicquot, please?" Sarah poured the champagne carefully, the familiar ritual of service feeling both comfortable and strange after 6 months away. Her hands were steady. "Enjoy your flight." "Thank you," the woman said. Then quieter, meeting Sarah's eyes with understanding, "I saw your video. I work in emergency aid. I've been in refugee camps, disaster zones, places where you see humanity at its worst and its best. I can't tell you how many times I've wanted to say something like that to the donors, who think their money buys them the right to be cruel, who treat our local staff like they're disposable. Thank you for having the courage." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "I just did what needed doing." "That's what courage is," the woman said gently. "Doing what needs doing, even when it costs you something, even when you're afraid." 3 rows back, in seat 5C, a man in his 30s flagged her down. Investment banker, Sarah guessed from the Patagonia vest and the way he held his phone like it was an extension of his body. She prepared herself for the worst. A complaint, a test, someone who wanted to see if the famous flight attendant would snap again. "I just wanted to say," he started, and then paused, seeming genuinely uncomfortable. "I was that guy, not on your flight, but I was that kind of customer, impatient, dismissive, treating service workers like they were there for my convenience and nothing else. I watched your video about 15 times, sent it to my wife. She said, 'That's you. That's how you act when you think no one important is watching.' It was hard to hear, but she was right. I'm trying to be better now, so thank you. And I'm sorry for all the flight attendants I was rude to before I figured it out." Sarah didn't know what to say to that. In all her imagining of how this day might go, she hadn't prepared for apologies, for growth, for the possibility that her moment of defiance might actually have changed someone's behavior. "Thank you for telling me that," she managed finally. In the galley, during a quiet moment between service rounds, Jason found her. He'd been assigned to economy on this flight, but he'd made his way forward during the break. "How's it feel?" he asked. "Being back?" "Strange," Sarah admitted, "like I'm the same person doing the same job, but everything's different now. People look at me differently. They expect something from me that I'm not sure I can give." "What do they expect?" "Perfection, I think. Or maybe just consistency. They want me to always be that person from the video, calm, dignified, unflappable. But I'm tired, Jason. I'm tired of being a symbol. I just want to do my job." "Then do it," he said simply. "The symbol thing, that's on them. You just be Sarah, That's enough. The flight to Chicago took 3 hours and 47 minutes. Sarah served drinks, distributed meals, answered call buttons, managed a minor dispute about overhead bin space, comforted a nervous flyer during turbulence over the Rockies. Normal work, important work. The kind of work that kept hundreds of people safe and comfortable while hurtling through the sky at 600 miles per hour. As they began their descent into O'Hare, Sarah made her final pass through the cabin, collecting glasses and trash. The woman in 2A, the Doctors Without Borders woman, handed her an empty champagne flute and a business card. "If you're ever interested in speaking to our donors about dignity and service," she said, "we'd be honored to have you. We need more voices like yours, reminding people that service isn't servitude." Sarah took the card, slipped it into her pocket. Maybe she'd call, maybe she wouldn't. But the option was there. A door opened by her refusal to stay silent. After the drink service, Sarah returned to the galley one final time before landing. Through the window, she could see clouds stretching to the horizon, the curve of the earth visible at this altitude. Somewhere down there was Oakland, her apartment, her life. Somewhere ahead was Chicago, the next destination, another crew of passengers with their own stories, their own dignities worth protecting. And beyond that, tomorrow, the next flight, the next chance to show up and do work that mattered. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother in Seattle. "Pride doesn't pay bills, but dignity pays the soul. I'm proud of you, Sarah." Another text, this one from Mia. "Stanford financial aid package came through. Full ride, Mom. Full ride. Your fight mattered. Everything you did mattered." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but she was smiling too. Somehow, impossibly, it had worked out. Not perfectly. There had been costs, losses, pain that would take years to fully process. But her daughter was going to Stanford without drowning in debt. Her son was preparing for Juilliard. She still had her job, her dignity, her voice. She looked out at the clouds again, at the endless sky that had been her workplace for 11 years and would continue to be for as many more as she chose. She thought about all the flights she'd worked before that moment with Whitmore, all the small degradations she'd accepted as just part of the job. She thought about Martha Davidson sipping champagne with tears in her eyes, about the investment banker apologizing, about the petition with 200,000 signatures, about Rachel fighting for free because she believed in the principle. She thought about David, dead 9 years now, who taught her that some lines couldn't be uncrossed, that dignity mattered more than convenience. She hoped he was proud. She hoped he knew that she'd taken everything he'd taught her about standing up for what was right, and she'd used it, finally, when it mattered most. She wouldn't do that anymore. None of them would. All the flight attendants and servers and retail workers and hotel staff and every other person whose labor kept the world running while being treated like they were invisible. One video, one lawsuit. One woman refusing to be diminished had cracked something open. It wouldn't change everything overnight, but it was a start. Sarah smoothed her uniform, checked her reflection in the galley mirror, and prepared to continue down the aisle. The flight had 3 more hours before landing. She had work to do, and somewhere in seat 2A, a woman who dedicated her life to helping others in crisis, sipped her champagne and smiled at the flight attendant who'd reminded everyone watching that service work didn't mean servitude, and that every person, regardless of the work they did or the price of their ticket, deserved to be treated with fundamental human dignity. The plane flew on through clear skies, carrying its cargo of strangers and stories toward whatever came next. And in the galley, Sarah Chen stood ready to face it, knowing that she'd already survived the worst and come out stronger on the other side. The cost of speaking up had been high, but the cost of staying silent would have been higher still, and in the end, that made all the difference.